That's weird. The AI is like, forget it. You guys are
I
done.
Yeah, AI is like, don't you dare start talking that way, freaking me out.
And I'm not about to spill my coffee, but I can see that it looks that way. Okay,
Isn't
so
that weird?
it is weird. So when everybody gets back, do you want to explain the six dimensions?
Well, you explained them differently the other day, which I think is interesting. I'm wondering when you cut out, as far like as soon as you froze, but I don't remember what you were saying when you froze, so I'm not sure um, at what point people missed. Because
Okay.
you I think given a fair amount of the explanation of the dimensions, you just went back through and we're talking about them. Okay, Julie's back, can see and hear us both. Julie, what was the last thing you heard Emma say? Because I was hearing the whole way along, so I don't know when it really cut out.
My technology is being especially weird. I'll tell you that right now. Um,
Oh, you froze at the end of the fifth? That was a long time ago. Like the original description of the fifth, because she kind of went through everything a couple times. Oh, goodness.
well, good. Michael's going to explain it now, you guys. There we go.
No, because I have a different explanation based on what you described the other day, which dovetails, but what we talked about the other day was entirely different than,
It was? Are you sure?
yes, I have it
Uh,
written down.
You ever? Oh, well, where the hell is that paper?
Not right here. And it's written on a paper with a bunch of other garbage on it, so it's not like it was written out well. I'm not gonna like hold it up and see everybody. Um, in other words, I don't know that I want to launch into that because then it's going to be potentially confusing, more confusing, and then we'll have to overlay, which I think in time overlaying the two, what you said the other day, or and what you're saying now, is completely doable. But I mean, I could rattle off what you said the other day, but
Well, I can find it.
what do you
Um,
mean?
do you guys understand? Well, I can find what I said here because um basically
Not in the blog, in the conversation.
I understand. Yeah. So this is what I said the other day. Let's just say the if then it would be the part that you were talking that we were originally talking about in terms of the horsemanship. So okay, like if we think about the first dimension as a single cue, right? A direct line.
Yeah,
This-
skip the first dimension. Like you said, that's not even reality. That
So
anything operates in just one dimension, or really that one even thinks in one dimension.
mhm, mhm. So the second dimension would be if then. In other words, if we think of negative reinforcement, if I do this, then you should do that. If you don't, something's going to happen. Or I'm going to do this until you do that, and then I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing.
So the way you described it the other day, and you'll keep doing this, as opposed to the way you just described it now. To me, the way you described it now, until you got to the fifth dimension, is largely spatially, it can be, until you get to the fifth dimension, semi detached, even as an observer. You can watch someone else with a horse operate in one, two, three, fourth dimension, as you just described it a bit ago, right? The way you're about to describe it, if it's the conversation we had the other day, is more the fullness of the lived experience, a individual interacting with their horse, or maybe someone experiencing it from the outside as well, but it's more the, to me, this is what the dimensions are. It's not just spatial, linear,
Yeah.
spatial poofiness, timeline, time and space dimensions. It's more the emotive. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay.
So
So,
2 can be if
but
then. If I do this, then the horse does that. It's a little bit
that's
like
really
press
important.
this button. Yes, which
That's that's really important because the second dimension is behavior modification. We can do this on ourselves. We can do this on a horse. If I do that, if I do this, that happens. If you do this, that happens. Right. So this is specifically behavior modification, one way or the other, using an if then strategy. For instance, if it's negative reinforcement, I add some pressure, you do something, the pressure is removed. In positive reinforcement, we would say if you do something, then you get something back. Like it's very specifically if then modality, right? So I pull on this rein, you do this, the rein goes away, right? I offer a field this way, you flow into the rectangle, you get peace. That's the two dimensions, right? Um, the third dimension would be space, depth, and timing. Okay, so that's really important because it's where we're operating, it's how poofy is the rectangle, it's the timing of everything. Um, so those are more like the biomechanics of like the volume of the rectangle, the gate, the speed of the gates, the transitions, all of those things. Which obviously we're adding on top of the second dimension. Come on, right? The fourth
yeah.
dimension we would say is the time and rhythm.
So you're still talking about what you talked about just now rather than what we've
Never do it then. This is what
huh?
you do it. You do it. Come on.
Well, what I jotted down from the other day in your quick rattling it off, the dimensions was one, which as we've just established, no one lives there, no one thinks there, forget it, even though it exists, in theory. Two is these very flat, if then transactional, perhaps,
Mhm.
or behavior modification. I mean, it can be transactional, it need not be transactional, but it is sort of academic, connect the dots, you know, it can be sort of flat, right? Which why two dimensions works pretty well. As soon as you hit the third dimension, we were, as you described it the other day, not focusing as much on spatial um, elements,
A physical result. Yeah.
a physical result, a physical moving through time and space, traveling through time. It moved into the experience of connecting beyond just that flat, if then could be just flat mechanical, do what I say sort of thing in its worst application and its best application. I love this comment. Nate, what are these hicks talking about? Love that bot. You can hang out for a bit. Um, so the third dimension, as you like when you rattled it off yesterday, was the emotional
Yeah.
component,
Yep.
right? So you could tie that in with it being more poofy, it being um, more, uh, all the things you just described in the physical realm of an additional dimension, but the emotions coming into that takes it from the flat if then in its worst application transactional interaction to I'm aware of the emotional state of my horse, which allows, like you said, the flow, the transitions, the poofiness. Like, if you're not thinking in those terms, that physical manifestation of looseness, of balance is kind of not going to be super accessible to you, right?
Yeah. It,
Um,
and that's
okay.
where
And so then four, let me think for a second. Four was flow. Okay.
was
So now,
yeah
huh?
the 2 individuals are hooked on.
Yes.
Yes.
And so there's kind of this flow between you, you're hooked on, whether it be you know, you could kind of think of flow and being hooked on as moving in the round crowd and the horse being with you and you sending them out and around and that sort of thing. But it could be also on the lead rope or from the saddle. The flow is like you're just kind of coasting along lily pad to lily pad. There
On a
is the there is the mechanics of this then this means that there is the emotion allowing it to flow, but now it's drifting along through space, right? So it is again incorporating that time element, but it's focusing on the emotion and the connection person to horse already in four, right? Fourth dimension. And fifth dimension is the feeling, where this sort of interaction between you and the horse, and this is where it tied into where pretty much how you described the fifth dimension today, is the horse contributing, the horse interacting, having ideas, this real conversational element where um whereby it's the feeling between you, not just a flowing connection, not just the mechanics, if this then that, and helping the horse settle emotionally, but now kind of a reaching for one another in a real thinky way rather than just um I guess more of a, I wouldn't say more of a physical element in four, because in four it would still have the emotion of three potentially. Any case, five is that feeling of, okay, let's just use as a bare example. Four moving into five might be you just breathing in, which is a hooked on, but feeling the horse ready to make a transition loose in the round corral and the horse having that thought and idea with you, or you feeling the horse ready to come down and hook on and you just drawing that in. It kind of blends flow into this real back and forth feely
Yeah.
thing, as opposed to maybe just my horse is hooked on and we're kind of in sync,
Yep.
right?
Right. So like yesterday riding Katniss, a good example of that would be like we were in flow together, but then she was like, "Hey, let me show you this trot."
Hmm.
And I hadn't asked her specifically for that, but she's extrapolating on her own and coming up with something to add that I
Yeah.
hadn't explicitly asked for.
So odd connection, not odd, but let's just throw this in here. Different realm, but as you said, like this is kind of, this is reality. We're not just describing something to describe something or making something up. And it's not just horses. So the other day, or yesterday, I was practicing Spanish, talking with a friend of mine in Spanish. And I used a verb that was similar to English. So it, it sounded the same. I was able to kind of create the verb because I imagine based on, anyway, never used the verb before, but I knew innately from having experienced the language enough, practiced it, used it, heard it, the conjunction that would naturally come after that verb, even though I hadn't academically learned that, that hadn't been explained to me. And it dawned on me that I put from A and B, my brain automatically pulled in C, and I, without without even thinking about it consciously myself until after the fact, created the correct or used the correct construction. And then I asked my friend, I'm like, was that right? Like, I feel like I just noticed that I did that, but I'm not positive it was right. It just felt right. So anyway, that was yesterday. I'm like, this is exactly what we were talking about horsemanship wise. So
neural connections, sort of
Yes.
mental.
If A, then if A and B are a part of the way we interact, the horse makes the connection, hey, how about C? And it kind of naturally builds on itself. Or just learning to interact with a horse and move in and amongst these dimensions, even if it's on like a two dimension sort of a if then level, you start to connect dots that may not be explained, have been explained to you, or that you even consciously learned. Like I've said a number of times, I'll be helping someone with something and I'm just like, do this. I'm like, no one ever taught me that. And I don't know why I know that's what it would work right now. But having done enough, worked at it enough, there's things that I picked up connection wise to do that were my brain and body and feel creating or finding things that worked without consciously learning it, right? And
For
that's other ways in which you're kind of operating in and amongst these dimensions, even with your own body and brain, basically interacting with another language or interacting with your own experience of interacting with the horse. Like you could separate your own experience and your own learning from that and say, I'm making connections as a result of the experience I'm having in this traveling around in these dimensions with the horse.
right, and this is where it's so cool because, like you were talking about with the other horse, just allowing the emphasis to be on other dimensions rather than her just if then education allowed her to, it was like, instead of going in a linear fashion, you were allowing all sorts of different things to come together. Another thing I would point out in the fifth dimension to me is when the horse, when you can give the horse A and C and they come up with B, or you and the horse have built enough language, words, sentences, paragraphs, that the horse can start to put those things together, like what you were saying with the Spanish, and there's all sorts of scientific interesting things that you could talk about, like the anandamide that we were talking about. That is the chemical that allows those connections to go laterally, and beyond just an if then model. That's part of it. So this is where we were talking about the way that you apply, the way that you practice in 2D. This is I think one of the most important things, the 2 to 3D connection here, because this is something everyone can put into practice or at least make their own decision about. And I'm sorry I'm jumping back down, but I think this is relevant, is when, because if you don't have the emotional state of contentment and peace, you cannot operate, in the fifth dimension, or even the fourth. Like they kind of all do go in order, and the place, this is for, I think, worth talking about. When we're talking about teaching the horse their basic education, if this, then that, and the reward is, let's say, food, you get one result, right? But if you are rewarding the horse with peace and love and appreciation, now we're bridging the gap between two and three.
Hmm. And I would, yes, I would add, based on talking about this in the same moment as I'm working with Farah, who I described last week. Um, and we even talked about the other day in the heart and soul conversation, was that while they are semi linear, like you're not going to get to 5, certainly not 6, without some back and forth conversation. That doesn't have to be as flat as 2 dimensions, but it has to have some some conversation started that might be more on a two-dimensional level. But it's not as linear as they have to be in this wonderful emotional state before you get flow. Like, certainly they can't be bouncing off the walls, but part of how I got with Farah to an emotional state that was able to settle was moving between kind of dimension 1 and 2, educating her as to what this means. But because she was pretty like just this weird, or this kind of really nice mixture of not braced but just not mentally settled, we were able to find flow, and that's part of what helped her get more emotionally settled. So it is kind of, it flows between these, but it's not strictly linear either. So let's run into, I mean, I don't know how much time we have because we restarted, so I don't have my
We're good.
we're
We have
good. Okay. So let's jump to the trailer loading now, because it will be as I was describing what I was doing to Sarah and Gabrielle, um, I was kind of struggling with the words I was using and not being fully satisfied with them. However, I think it is a very good case study for discussing the dimensions and what we were just talking about, particularly kind of establishing some of the first dimensions and what that opened up. We will also tie into what Julie just asked: where does the history and experience of the horse and handler fall into the dimensions?
Yeah,
Okay.
like Buck can walk across the arena to a horse that has a busy mouth, and all of a sudden it's like turn
Yeah.
loose, and then yeah,
Yeah.
all that. Yeah,
Yeah. And a horse that has history versus a horse that's pretty clean, right? So, um, what was quite interesting about Carly, Gabrielle's horse, is she was resistant or hesitant, but I would say resistant to going into the trailer. She was concerned about the trailer, but not terrified, right? It's not like she hadn't been in there. It's not like she hadn't been in there and turned loose and relaxed. It's not like she couldn't get in there, but she felt like there were a lot of optional doors to go through. So why go through this uncomfortable experience of going in the trailer if you don't have to? Right? Like, if I can check out and avoid the uncomfortable thing, and back up, and then maybe I go forward and come in, but when asked to do the uncomfortable thing, I'll just say no and back up. And what I will run into, while annoying, while frustrating, while, yeah, undesirable, was tolerable enough that I'll just keep trying that, right? So the conversation that I had with her and was describing to Sarah and Gabrielle is, those doors have to shut firm enough that she begins to explore the door she is mentally blocked from, and saying, I'm not going to try that door. I'm going to keep trying all these others, even though I keep running into stuff. Because there was still in her mind a possibility of finding her way through those doors and avoiding going into the trailer.
they were known.
The doors were known, yes. Um, Even though she kind of had to push through them. And so at one point I said, it's the horse that's like, well, I'm in the pen, but I know if I chest bump that gate enough, I can get out. So when I really want the grass on the other side, I've learned that if I just kind of rattle this gate or whatever, it'll open. So, or I can easily jump the fence, right? So I'm fine being in here as long as I want to be in here. But if I want to get out for the grass or something scares me, like I know completely that I can easily whoop over the fence and be gone. So there is no rectangle there, right? In that scenario. It is, but it's permeable. They can just leave it. So it was a conversation around I have to close the doors more definitively, but not prevent her from going through the doors to the point where she's feeling shut down because she's very inclined to shut down. And when she does, she locks up, panics, like the whole thing. You don't have a movable horse. You just can kind of become a block. Um, and go into very much self-defense mode. So it was not like super calculated and thoughtful, but it was kind of calculated. Like I'm just gonna avoid by going here and there. So shutting those doors efficiently, effectively, but not slamming them to the point where she's like, I have no option of going through that door. I have no option there. She still had to make the decision. So we're very much operating in if then at this point, but
Except
as long as those doors are open, when I ask her forward, she is going to get emotional. She is not emotionally settled because there's always the option of going through this other door. And the more I say that door is shut, the more emotionally unstable and unsettled she became until she began to explore. And she didn't have to fully make the decision, but she began to explore maybe that door is less of a concern than, or not a concern, but
is
that
at least
door is open, right? That door has been open the whole time. I just didn't want to go through that door, right? But these other doors are really not working out. Um, so it was very much back to the education of the mechanics. If then, which let's be generous and say if then is done um, with feel and letting the horse make decisions. It's not operating solely on that plane. You're looking for that to open up, flowing together and having emotional stability and moving around in space, right? It's not just eh, yeah. Anyway, um
well, when you start to have curiosity, interest, like even let's just say trailer loading, where you're moving the horse around and they just notice that the new door. And at first they could dismiss it, but all of a sudden they could be, looking in there like in a curious way. For instance, let's say you're, gathering horses into a catch pen, out of a big field, you're waiting for them to start noticing that the gate is open. Right.
yeah.
And then you are like, oh, well, maybe they're like, well, maybe I might like it there.
Mhm. And again, if you can make the trailer less desirable by putting the mash on right there too, right? To where they feel more the need to go out. So you can kind of work against yourself.
That's what I'm
Um,
trying to say. That is exactly what I'm trying to say is by understanding the way these dimensions work together, that they're there, that there's a way to kind of shoot yourself in the foot, let's try to avoid that. So maybe just explain that a little bit more.
well, it's sorry, folks, but we're back to what we keep running into. It's complex, and experience really helps because finding that feel and is so different moment to moment, depending on the emotional state of the horse, depending on whether the ground is a little icy through the grass and they just slipped, depending on one horse versus another horse, whether their friend just whinnied, or like it can shift so quickly as to how much pressure they can tolerate. And so you're making your calculation of, is this the moment to say, I need more try? Or are we good with where we are right now because we're not truly emotionally in this space? So we get the time dimension, but we get the emotional dimension of the time and location, because they need to arrive there before you say, but now at a certain point, like, we're not just going to arrive here and say, yeah, but I really like this is, I'm cool going this far, but I'm not really, like you said, going to be curious enough. Or I might be curious until you tell me to go. And then it's like, yep, checking out. Those doors were still open last I checked. Open enough. Right.
And this is
But at
where
a certain point, with whatever experience you have, you got to try and fail, or try and succeed, or fail and then succeed and get some help and whatever, all of that, until you get to the point where you find the right amount of pressure that the horse goes, those doors are like, I know if I go back, it's just not going to work out. And I'm going to run into enough pressure that maybe I should consider something else. And so that was the struggle. It's like I am talking in one and two dimensions, and I am talking pressure and release, and a bit um, transactional. But as long as there is no if then, that motivates the horse to consider another option, to consider getting with me, sharing my idea, to have their own idea positively in the right direction, to getting emotionally settled as opposed to just getting more emotionally settled, maybe just because they know the door is open, or because I'm now saying, like, let's try, right? Um, if that, if those parameters aren't there, and the horse hasn't made a decision to explore something, that just categorically she's like, I'm not doing that. Nope. I don't have to. Don't want to. Other doors are open. You're kind of screwed, right? So come forward off the rope. Follow a feel. If I drive, put in a little bit more. Don't just kind of ignore that. Let me tap on you. And I have energy, and you're like, "Rah," or you're just leaning, or not pulling on the rope, but it was that, like, I'm looking out there, and it's like, no, think with me, and all of these things, so that we have the ability to get a try, get some buy-in from the horse, that isn't just, here's where I check out and get emotional. So
that's right. And the if thens make horses feel better,
yes.
especially when they're consistent. They make all of
Yeah.
us feel better. Well, how
Yeah.
many times do we say it in a clinic? Okay, so you guys, here's how we're gonna do this so that blah 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 blah. That's what we're
Mhm.
talking about. The if
Right.
then component. And that's not a bad thing. That is what starts to help horses be like, okay, here we go. Let's
Parameters, boundaries, helping them find the center.
giving them a place
And
to start to operate. That's
mhm,
what Buck says it, or these guys, but the element of, like what Ray has said or said, is, horses know what they lived and how they lived it.
mhm,
Element of that. So the difference between a horse that has learned that there's lots of open doors around the trailer's not that great of an option, and da 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 da, da, whatever degree that is, you already have a certain amount of history of the horse knowing what they lived and how they lived it, and a certain amount of trial and error that they have data from. That if
mhm,
you have a clean horse, they aren't going to have any data, so you have an opportunity to just write the base, the 2D base. But yeah, we should not be afraid of the if then
yeah.
code. I mean, this doesn't even make sense. Like, that's what everything is operating on anyway. Yeah, I love that example. It is a great example.
So just a few more fascinating things around it. The sticky points were like it wasn't, it was everything I described. We're just the doors are open, even though I can go in there and be fine. Like I've done it. As soon as she said, "Okay, I'm going in," she was like, "Poof, whatever. Like I'm cool being in here." The sticky points were the divider closing, the feeling trapped, being trapped, right? Being confined, and the transition over the threshold, right? So imagining the trajectory of this that got us here, I was describing to them that it may have been we went in, the divider closed, or we weren't fully settled and we panicked and then stumbled over the threshold. Or we went over the threshold in a panic. That was the initial concern point. Ended up in concern because of the threshold being a struggle, and then came back out, struggled again, and like that, we have a resistance to the trailer that back to if those other doors are open, we're just going to keep trying them because my initial just apprehension about the trailer has turned into concern based on being worried and then stumbling out or stumbling ending up in and then stumbling out. So those were the two points that, like, even though we ended with her, coming in fluidly, closing the divider, being quiet there, backing out, flowing over that transition much more smoothly, standing in the trailer much, those are the two spots that still need repeats, to where it's just until those are cleared up to where she's like, just can flow over this transition, no big deal. I can go in there, divider close, doesn't have to be, oh crap, And she doesn't even rock it out once the divider is open, but it's certainly like, oh, it's open, right? And there were a few times that stood out. One kind of in the midst of working on it initially before hauling her here, um, where it was like the most thoughtful backing out and stepping out over the threshold that we had. But as soon as she got out, she went immediately to thinking out to the right. And I was like, I hate to do this because that was the nicest thing yet. But if we end with her mind out there, that is not that was not a thing. It's not gaining us anything. So I had to right then like get pretty firm, a bump on the rope, a whack in the shoulder, because she was the more I drove, the more she's like, that door. I just did that fluidly, but that door. And so then I got her to where she was truly there and repeated that again until she came out and was truly just relaxing there. So that was one. And then we, closed the divider a few times, hauled her here, unload her here. She was actually a little sweaty, but not bad, and hauled nicely. But same thing, open the door, a little bit anxious to get out, not rocketing back and totally a scramble, but just like, okay, the door's open, I got to get out of here, and gets out. Wasn't even necessarily worried about landing in a new place, but just like immediately get away from this trailer, look for those open doors. And I was like, okay, well, we have to work on this here. It can't be we got her here and now give her a break. It's we have to do what we just did so that the end result is not the thought of thank God get me away from this, looking for all the open doors. The door still has to be, even though we just did this trailer ride, we've spent a lot of time on this. We don't want to beat a dead horse. If we end with her thinking, thank God, get out of here, it kind of will almost undo everything we just spent time establishing. So back in and out. And and like there's a lot of time spent on this, but it wasn't just getting the job done. It was getting through the one and two dimension mechanics, the if then, your response cannot be ignoring or resisting, like follow this feel, then establishing through repeats this is doable, right? Where you thought it wasn't, all that. There were three moments, well, it was the same thing, but three times, three repeats of it, where she went in, there was hay in the front, but I was not using that. But in the past, food has been used as a motivator, where she was in and quite settled, but she took a quick bite and then just went and sucked back out of there. Not racing, but certainly a grab and go sort of feel to it. I was like, huh, that is interesting. That is essentially a pattern derived from the fact that food was kind of a, okay, I want the food, so I'm going to go in and get the food, but I'm not comfortable in here, so I'm going to grab the food and go. And there were two times where I kind of sensed that a little bit, but it wasn't extreme. And the third time was like, there was definitely, okay, I'm comfortable enough in here that, oh, and there's hay. I'm going to go grab the hay, but it was a grab and go, like distinct feeling. I was like, that's
Mean
why.
grabbing of the hay or the grabbing of the food had become its own cue.
Had become its own cue and had because it was a motivator in, but not a motivator to stay because there was no peace associated with it. Had yeah, essentially created a feeling of get the reward and go, and did essentially became so that was interesting to see that show up in the middle of there, of pretty clear example of how ineffective that can be, in terms of the long run. Maybe it's a make it or break it situation. Got to get to the vet. This is a get him in, slam the door. We don't want this to be how it is in the long run, but um, so it lots of opportunity to think of that, but working very much in that one and two dimension, and
And
yet having to get to where like
mhm.
energy came up and we just flowed forward. We could go away and we walk up and just doop 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 right into the trailer, get settled, and then having to add the divider, having still to work on particularly the backing out, like her getting more thoughtful, having time to do that, like to where it wasn't just get in the trailer or you're going to get whacked. You're going to get whacked until you move forward into the trailer. There was components like that, but it was working toward moments of togetherness and peace that is going to make it stick for the future. Anyway, that's that
That's
story. It was cool. It was fun.
Yeah. So, Gabrielle said, as Michael, she might be repeating, as Michael said when referring to what Emma said regarding the hear what the horse is thinking, it's more of a different way of communication with the horse that is sensed viscerally. Mm-hmm. Not, yeah, yeah. Good point. That's a really good point, Gabrielle. Excellent. Feel free to be bringing that up whenever we're not giving enough thought to that. I totally like that because she's
Mhm.
right. I personally do use here um to
Or
imply
listen to the horse.
yeah. So free to bring that up. Yeah. Um
Which is interesting because that is our conscious human experience
hmm,
relates to that language
yep.
more than feel. Now, Gabrielle and Sarah both doing um, body work and all of that, they have a much more practiced in their day-to-day life and in their careers a feel component, but that's so long or so many times you hear the word feel and it's like, well, you can't describe feel, even though that's a lot of what we're trying to do, put words to it, some, but you can't really describe it until you experience it. Or you don't really know it until you experience it, but that is probably in a way where we use the listen to the horse, hear the horse as a more relatable language universally than feel, because feel gets a little abstract, even though that's absolutely what it is.
Yeah, for sure. Because there's a tactile element, there's an intuition element, and
Mhm.
words fail. That's the bottom line. You have to
Yep.
be talking to somebody who has had some breath of that, some whiff of that, in order, because words are just a total, um, yeah, just inadequate. So Julie says, where does the history and experience of the horse and the handler fall into the dimensions? Well, that's the two body problem, right? Is you have one entity that's experiencing all six dimensions, and you have another entity that experiencing all six dimensions, and the way they interact is absolutely based on what their experience is. Julie says, in all the freezing and restarting, I missed the clear description of the sixth dimension. That's because we didn't do it.
Yeah, we didn't get there.
You didn't miss anything? Guess, Julie. Just guess what it is. Come on. Well, you want to say what it is, Michael?
Um, it's uh,
That's right. You
is
should
it,
listen. Wait, read Corey's thing. This is so right. Corey's 100%.
I've been thinking the whole time how limited words can be. It's like trying to describe what God looks like. Yeah.
Which
Uh,
people have tried to do for centuries, right? And why do we try to do it? Why do we do this show? Why did I write that blog? Because I want to share the experience with, the people that I care about. Yeah, anyway, totally. Totally. Words are just
it's the true unity. It's the becoming one, operating as one.
Julie. I guess woo woo. That's right. That's the true unity moment, as Michael says. And of course, that is the soul connection. My God particles and the horse's God particles are synchronized and touching each other on all other dimensions. And that's a very, what I was thinking, Michael, riding Katniss yesterday in particular. Um, there's a lot of there's a lot to be said about what goes on in the sixth dimensional part of this. Um, we don't have time to talk about it today. But a few thoughts is how intimate it is. So how much trust that takes. And one of the things that I have long been trying to put my finger on, that a lot of us have experienced to some degree or the other, but that I really struggle with, is there's a promise involved in the horse being able to interact that way. In other words, like there's a promise of how we're going to operate and be like as a person. And then the unfortunate part, or the part that is hard to reconcile, is, I think, the promise of it being a long-term situation. Uh, so if you get my drift,
Hmm.
yeah, there's an element of that, and breaking the promise is really heartbreaking. And of course, I run into the problem of quote unquote horse training, knowing I can't keep that promise, or because then you can't operate in the sixth dimension very um sincerely, which is a huge part of, but not that I mean, obviously operating in five dimensions is great, but do you follow me there? uh, that's a struggle and a whole topic in and of itself, it just occurs to me, there's a vulnerability and a bareness that is there when that true unity truly comes about. It can look like it, when someone's operating in five dimensions for sure. But I think for those of us that have experienced, which probably all of us have, a thread of that, a whisper of that when we are like become one thing is how I had said it, I think, in the blog is like, ooh, that's a lot of trust. Why would you do that? Why would you do that if it wasn't gonna last? Everybody has a different way to say that, right? It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all.
Well, just um, thinking of like if it's a spouse, certainly you could say that, but if you think of it as the connection parent to child or someone with which you have like this extremely wow, that was weird. I just came up with a Spanish word rather than the English word. Uh,
And
this
big deal.
uh, this nurturing, caring relationship, and yet the that has an intimacy and a closeness that is hopefully fostering growth and relationship in the horse to release that horse into life with someone else, their spouse or partner or whatever of the future. You know, you could think of it that way, but it's certainly it has a letting go element in there, but I don't know that it necessarily there can't be a transfer. It depends on how cold the transfer is or how much the horse matches with their new experience. Um, so I don't know. Possibly.
Hmm.
Little pushback on the idea.
Well, I think there has to be an element of that.
Yeah.
Certainly with child rearing, and of course when it does, there's a whole pathology that goes along with it. Um,
Corey said the difficulty of the journey is that accidentally micro break the promise along the way by getting off track with intent or timing. That's why it's so emotional and heavy. God dang.
yeah.
100%. No, come on. Don't push back on that. You're right, Corey. Ignore whatever Emma's going to say.
Hey, hey. Well, listen. Okay. I hear what you're saying, Corey, but the only thing is, you're committed to Wit. You're not going to sell her, or somehow be like, I'm not your friend, I'm not your partner, and we're never going to see each other again. Which is cool because that is the horses start to count on that. It's like we are each other's people, so to speak. um, right? And perhaps that applies to the child. It's like I'm your father. That is not going to change,
Mhm.
and I'm going to be here for you forever, and that's not going to change. So that's the part where you can make that promise and keep it. And the franticness that I feel, just as a side note personally, if I have to sell a horse, or yeah, that would be the bottom line. If I have to sell a horse, is the fact that I'm breaking that promise, which I shouldn't have made in the first place. So I guess what I'm saying, Corey, is unless you decided to sell your horse, um, you're not breaking the promise that I'm kind of thinking of.
But if you're talking about promising to hold that as priority and along the way, you're like, shit, that I lost track of that. Like,
Yeah, you can
got caught up in dimension one or two. What?
horse doesn't care. All you have to be like, sorry. And so long as you once you have touched on that, I think us bumbling around in the other five dimensions, they don't really care.
Depends on how much you bumble.
Perhaps, perhaps, or you accidentally make it seem like you're ditching, when you're really just not. Um, yeah, for sure. So Julie says, but what is time and what? What are you saying, Julie? What is time and physics? What? I'm not sure what exactly
There's
you're.
an additional typo there beyond the nonlinear, Julie. You might have to I think.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, Julie, I'm not for sure. Emily says even when they grow up and move out and get married, it kind of exactly, right? Like there's a thread that will never be broken. Or yeah, that what if? But what if time and physicality is on linear? Well, time isn't.
But what if time and physicality is nonlinear? And if it will last eternally on another plane?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not, and we are, that's the whole point, right? A little bit is like it is nonlinear,
Mhm.
because linear would be one dimension. Oh, see, these are the parent conversations that I can only intellectualize. Yeah, Emily says that's the best and the worst. hmm And I don't know. I guess I keep fantasizing that there's a way to experience something similar with a horse if you sell it. Um, I don't know. I don't know. But I don't want having sold a few horses to hold me back. Just saying this again personally, you guys. I don't want that to damage my ability, my willingness, my unconscious, I'll say ability again. I don't want it to damage my unconscious ability to operate in the sixth dimension because I have broken my promise in the past, or had to unwind that. Um this makes me think of how damaging that is to me. I'm not trying to judge anybody else here, and maybe I'm not even thinking about it correctly, but it does feel. And everyone's always like, "Oh, you're being too this, you're being too that, you're making too much of it, or you should just get rid of that horse, or you have to." And it's like, oh, it's like, yeah. Anyway, I don't know. Those are just some additional thoughts. See how much there is to kind of talk about here, though, and it's not easy. But I do think that there's value. I do think if we want all six dimensions. If we don't, we are wasting our time.
In
Sarah
other words, having this conversation, if we're not aiming at all six dimensions, is
is ridiculous.
it's understandable that someone would be like, "What a waste of time!" If that is not the target. Like, what the
Mhm.
hell are you even talking about? Who cares?
Who cares would be
Yeah.
yeah, and it would be a much easier deal for sure. So Sarah says maybe it helps to think that you're giving them the horse the opportunity to operate with someone else on that level as well. Yeah, maybe. Julie, I think you can sell a horse without breaking the promise. Perhaps you're transferring their care to someone that you have cautiously and carefully selected, knowing it's going to be good. Yeah, maybe. Sarah says horses don't hold grudges and they are much more forgiving than us. Yeah, for sure. Although I think horses can hold a grudge for a little while, and apparently mules can too.
Oh yeah.
Um, Timmy, you have to wait. We're almost done with the show, buddy. Yeah. Um, it's all very interesting. Well, you guys should have the last word. Michael, you have the last word. And then we'll have to go for today.
I I think I've said most of the words I got.
Okay.
The last word, I don't know. The dimensions are cool to think about. I personally find more value in thinking of them in terms of one, two, transactional education, emotion as three, four as flow, five as feeling together, and six as true unity. But I like tying the two in with the physical, spatial, time, linear but not linear component, or linear and nonlinear components toward becoming one being operating in that those spatial elements is is possible to link the two together. But to me, your description the other day, when I'm like, what are you meaning by, because you mentioned the second and the sixth in your article without too much description of the whole gamut, or the whole range of what each dimension is. So when you rattled off what you had in mind the other day, that struck me more than the the initial breaking it down you did today. But I think they're both cool and integratable as we talk about them more. And you write your 3 blogs breaking it down, as Kip suggested.
Well, what I was thinking is for the insider dispatch, like I'll at least write a written, you know, reference to like probably those two. We'll do the one that we talked about yesterday, transaction and an emotional, peaceful, dynamic rectangle, then the hooking on, of the two people, and then the feeling together, like, and then that spiritual component. So, holy smokes, you guys, my little dog is being bossy pants. She's
Demanding.
she's getting confident is the thing. So I'm really sorry for the barking. Okay, you guys. Well, shall that be it for today? Yes. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us on this. We don't have to talk on this level all the time, but
It's exhausting.
it is exhausting. It is exhausting. Oh, it is. It so is. But the problem is when you just get to just tell me what to do. It's like, yeah, but how you do it
Yeah.
is capable. So what a little bit at a time, right? A little bit at a time.
And it's all right. I mean, there's some days where I'm like, get to the show, I'm like, I don't have the energy to have this conversation today, but I'm here. We're doing it. And there's other days where it gives you energy, or you're like, I'm here for it. Let's talk. This is, you know, so yeah, it is. There's days you maybe just go and exist next to your horse and let that be
Hmm.
the part of, living in those dimensions. It doesn't have to be weighty and heady. And some days you're like, you guys are too much today, turn off the show and I'll listen to it back sometime when I have the mental space to do it. So
For sure.
I don't have that luxury. Sorry, Emma, I don't have the mental space to do it. Let's do the show at 3 o'clock today or tomorrow sometime.
Yeah. Well, I kind of feel like I'm worn out a little bit in
I
return
Yeah.
trying to think about it all. So, but it's nice to get it out a week before the clinic so we can all kind of, you know, have it rattling around. But then we can get down to like, all right,
Yeah.
let's do some gymnastics and zoom in on our skills and everything, knowing that this is like we all acknowledge that this is what we're trying to do. The one thing I'll just one more time, what you reward your horse with is kind of important, I think, in regards to spiraling up in this whole way. I think something you guys know. This is something I've been thinking about it a lot over the last while. So, all right. Well, let's all go take a nap.
Wish I could.
Yeah, me too. All right, you guys. Thank you so much, Mike. Oh, so next week the show is going to be
Shows on
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah, the show's on Wednesday because I'm traveling to Bellwether on Thursday. So, that'll be that. So I'll let you guys know. All right, everybody. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.